Welcome everybody to this lecture on the United States Constitution. Today we're going to be going over the Constitution and its various parts. You see here is a picture of the United States Constitution, which begins with the famous words, "We are the people." We know that as the preamble of the Constitution or introduction. So, "We the people," and it goes on to say a few other words of the United States. That is the preamble, and then followed down here by 7 articles, and they're listed Article 1, and then it goes further, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'll talk about each of the articles. You can think of them as paragraphs, if you will. We'll talk about each article and kind of what that includes and how it sets up the United States government. And then over here we have a picture of the Constitutional Convention, which was in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Of course, here's our main man, hero of the Revolutionary War, George Washington, who was asked to be at the Constitutional Convention, and all of these guys are your delegates from the states. So each state sent a delegate or multiple delegates to discuss basically how to correct their original Constitution, which was the Articles of Confederation. They had to scrap them, and what came of that was the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so a couple of important points to make about the preamble or the introduction of the Constitution. It begins with the famous words, "We are the people," as you can see here. Basically what that emphasizes is we the people means that the government is created by the citizens. So you notice it doesn't say "I the king" or anything like that. We the people. So this government is created by the citizens, which again is a very new idea in the world in 1787. And further down it says, "in order to form a more perfect union." Noticing those words, that is still in the preamble, it kind of speaks to the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Again, our original Constitution was the Articles of Confederation, and they were just too weak. They created a weak national government, and they needed to be redone. They could not satisfy the problems of a young nation. So again, the words "we the people" emphasize the government created of the citizens, and then later on in the preamble, "in order to form a more perfect union," emphasizes the idea that the union as it was under the Articles of Confederation were just too weak. So after the preamble is Article 1, and again there will be 7 of them. Article 1, you would think it discusses the most important part of our government, which is the legislative branch. Again, the legislative branch is that branch of government that makes the laws for the country. So this is the most important part of our government, and you can tell that it's reflected in the Constitution because it is Article 1. Also, if you look at the Constitution, Article 1 is the same length as Article 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 put together. So again, it is the legislative branch, the most important branch. Now, our legislative branch is what they call bicameral, meaning there's 2 houses. 1, the Senate, and 2, the House of Representatives. So if you look at this building right here, which is the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C., you have a left chamber, which is where your senators are, and there's 2 for every state, so you can see equal representation there. And then there's a right chamber, which is where your House of Representatives is. Notice there are many more representatives than there are senators. Each state has a certain number of representatives based on its population, and as the state's population changes, so will its number of representatives. These 2, the House and the Senate, will work together to make laws, print money, establish taxes. These are the main functions of your legislative branch. And again, this is a branch of representatives elected by the people for the most part. The House of Representatives is elected every 2 years, and the Senate is elected every 6 years. And as part of our checks and balances, which we will be going over in future discussions, notice the President has the power to veto any law that the Senate and the House of Representatives both pass on to become an official law. So the President does have oversight over Congress in the terms of veto. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution and the length of Article 2, which is the second longest paragraph or article of the Constitution, describes what we consider the second most important branch of government, the executive branch or the President. Again, we wanted to make sure that we did not have a president that was too powerful, because we were just getting through our revolution and we didn't want anybody who might look like a king. So notice some of the things to make our president, as described in Article 2, or the executive branch, our president, not look like a king, is Article 2 sets limits on how long the president can serve. 4 years. It also says there will be a vice president to work along with the president. The president will be chosen by electors picked by state legislatures. So notice the president is not directly elected by the citizens as provided by the U.S. Constitution. He or she will serve as the commander-in-chief of the military, so they're in charge of the military. They are basically the head citizen of the United States. They create a cabinet of advisors to help them out. They will appoint foreign ambassadors, so people who can help us with other countries. They will appoint Supreme Court judges, and the Senate confirms those Supreme Court judges. So again, checks and balances. The president appoints the judges, the Senate has to confirm. And another checks and balance here, the president can be impeached or removed from office by the House of Representatives if a trial held in the Senate feels like the president has violated a major law. So again, Article 2 describes our second most important branch, the executive branch. Article 3 describes the third and final branch of our government, the judicial branch, And you can see by looking at the Constitution, it's a much smaller branch of government. So either there was less fear about the power of the judicial branch, or less understanding about the impact the judicial branch would have. Either way, the judicial branch sets up a federal court system headed by one single Supreme Court, which you can see here in Washington, D.C. There is a Supreme Court which is headed by a chief judge or a chief justice. The Supreme Court judges, which today there are 9 of them, will serve for life. So again, once the president appoints them and the Senate confirms them, they do serve for life unless they are impeached by Congress for a major offense. The Supreme Court is in charge of reviewing all legal cases of national importance. So again, you'll talk about national cases of the Supreme Court throughout the year in U.S. history. Lower courts can be added by Congress. Article 3 does provide for courts underneath of the federal Supreme Court to be added. Again, it doesn't say they have to, but it does provide for it in case. Important here is the Supreme Court is famously known for judicial review, meaning that it does have the power to declare laws unconstitutional, laws passed by Congress, and a lot of people mistake that as a constitutional checks and balance. However, Article 3 does not mention judicial review, which is why the Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison, which you will talk about in the future, is so important to expand that power of the judicial branch. One of the main concerns of early United States or early American colonies is how do you get 13 colonies, nevertheless 13, or the various groups within those colonies, to actually work together. Remember, none of these colonies came here to be a new country. Most people within colonies didn't know each other. So how do you get these colonies, which are now states under the United States Constitution, how do you get them to work together? And that's what Article 4 says. Article 4 says that each state must respect each other's court hearings. So again, the states have the power to make most laws as long as they don't conflict with the Constitution. So this says that each state has to respect the laws of other states, meaning if there are public records, if there are court hearings, if there are criminals, or even as it was, slaves who escape and seek asylum or freedom in another state, those states must return those criminals or slaves to the appropriate state, even if that state doesn't respect that law. So if Maryland doesn't have a law against slavery and Virginia does, and a Virginia slave escapes into Maryland, even though Maryland doesn't have a law saying slavery is okay, it must respect Virginia's law and return that slave or criminal. It talks about, Article 4 also talks about how new states can be admitted to the Union. So once a new state draws its boundaries, has a certain population, and writes up the Constitution, it will submit its application to Washington, D.C., to Congress for admittal. And Congress can control that admittance. Congress will also control all territories that are not states. So as the United States accumulates more land, In the time before they become official states, Congress can determine it will do whatever it wants. That's Article 4. Article 5 discusses how you can make changes to the Constitution or amendments to the Constitution. And if you look, 2/3 of Congress, that means both the House and the Senate, must vote that a change is necessary or wanted by the people. 2/3 is a large majority. These amendments, if they are passed, they will be ratified when they are sent to state legislatures. So again, the House and Senate proposes an amendment, they send it to each state, and once 3/4 of the states agree to them, those amendments will become part of the Constitution. Of course, the most famous amendments to the Constitution are the first 10, which happened in 1791, ratified officially, which means, again, 3/4 of the states agreed with Congress that these are necessary amendments. So the first 10 amendments will be known as your Bill of Rights. So that's what Article 5 says, how to make changes to the Constitution. Article 6 is the Supremacy Clause. It says that no law in the land can supersede or contradict the U.S. Constitution. So even though states do have the power to make any law they want to, they have to first make sure that that law does not contradict the United States Constitution. So again, the Supremacy Clause of Article 6 basically sums it up, that no power of the state is more powerful than the federal government. The final article of the Constitution is ratification, or the rules for ratification. This takes one line on the Constitution. If you look at the Constitution, it says that the Constitution is ratified or made official as a United States law when 9 out of 13 states sign. And you can see here, Delaware was the first to sign, and they were obviously unanimous here. Pennsylvania signed not much later by a good margin. New Jersey was unanimous. Georgia was unanimous. Connecticut was unanimous. And this all happens pretty much within 1 month. And then there's a month delay as you get votes that get a little bit tighter and a little bit closer. There were some holdups. There were some debates, especially in southern states, about individual freedoms, which is why they ultimately added a Bill of Rights. But again, that's what Article 7 says, is that the Constitution will become official once 9 out of 13 states sign. Of course, you can see that magic number 9 happened about 6 months later in June with New Hampshire. And again, a very tight race, followed by Virginia and New York, who were the largest and most influential states. And you can see how tight those votes were. So even though Virginia and New York did not make the Constitution unofficial by holding out, the fact that they were the most powerful states, it was significant that they signed on to the Constitution before it was official and powerful. The final part of the U.S. Constitution is the bottom, the signatures page. So each state, everybody who was at each of the 12 states at the time that were actually at the Constitutional Convention, Rhode Island actually did not come, they boycotted the convention. So each of the 12 states, the people who were part of making this Constitution in September 1787, they were there for months. So at the end of this long, grueling process, they all signed their name to it, but this does not make it official. Remember back to Article 7. This is just saying that those delegates believe, or those representatives from the states believe that this is the best way to move forward as a country. It will not become official until this document is sent to each one of these states and 3/4 of these states ratify it, which will happen within 9 months, making the U.S. Constitution the supreme official law of the United States of America.